Welcome back to the Argentina Project podcast. I'm Benjamin Gadan, director of the Wilson Center's Argentina Project. In part one of this special conversation, former U.S. Ambassador to Argentina, Noah Mamet, my former State Department colleague, hosts his successor, Edward Prado, who served as ambassador in Buenos Aires until this past January. They discuss their experiences representing very different U.S. presidents and interacting with very different Argentine governments.
Thanks so much, Benjamin, and thanks to the Argentina Project at the Wilson Center and Ambassador Prado. It's great to see you again, my friend. So I'm glad you're well in this really tough era we're living through with COVID, and I know you went through the terrible storms down in San Antonio, so I'm glad you're well. I wanted to ask the first question, what were your expectations going into the job as ambassador? Because you were a non-career ambassador like me and like many others that we know. What were your expectations versus the experience, both at the work level and then also on the personal level? Because this is the kind of job, I think if you're a non-career ambassador, you really don't have much experience working with an embassy or working inside an embassy. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and what the reality was versus the expectation or perception.
Good to be with you, Noah, and good to see you again. I had the opportunity to go to Buenos Aires and other parts of Argentina about 5 different occasions as a judge. And so I was invited and I went and enjoyed meeting judges and prosecutors and lawyers. And that's how I got to know and be interested in Argentina. And that was my only experience is dealing with the judiciary. And after 34 years of being a judge, I thought, well, something different. The executive branch, going into it, knowing, well, we're going to be negotiating international issues. There'll be some U.S. companies doing business down there, and I'll be the spokesperson for the administration. But like you, not exactly sure exactly what to expect. As a judge, your life is much more isolated. Your social life is somewhat isolated. You have to be careful where you go. You can't go to any political events or any fundraisers, lend your name to anything. But getting to the embassy was such a different thing because there was something going on every night, as you know, and sometimes 2 or 3 events a night. And I wasn't used to that big social thing and hosting events. Living in a house like the Bosch Palace, I went from my house with no assistance and help here to all of a sudden you have a staff of 9 people that are taking care of the house and hosting events of several hundred people twice a week, sometimes during the day, and being a host to events and making public speeches almost several times a week was something way different than the isolated life of a judge. Getting to meet people in the executive branch of Argentina, being there in Argentina at the capital, you met almost every person on the president's staff, ministers, the cabinet level people, mayors, governors of provinces. As a judge, I just didn't meet people of that type. Dealing with all the different U.S. companies, as you know, there are over 300 U.S. companies doing business there, and they always have some issue, some problem, and they come to the embassy for help or assistance. So in some ways, you're also the representative and spokesperson for some of these companies that have issues. And that was different. I as a judge, I was the decision maker that listened to both sides and made a decision. And all of a sudden, I was one of those making the arguments and trying to persuade people to see things from my perspective. And I was more of an advocate for the United States or a particular company more than the judge who sits and makes a final decision. So it was a dramatic change to have all the social activities that we had and to be an advocate rather than just a decision maker.
I want to congratulate you. On a great term in representing the United States. I always felt that representing the United States abroad is the greatest honor you can have, I think, in your professional life. We met, I think, the first week or 2 after you arrived. And you were very gracious to me, and I just want to congratulate you on a great 3 years. We had something in common because we both served when they had 2 different presidents. You know, I was there basically 1 year with President Kirchner, and then 1 year with President Macri. And so I wanted to ask you, because you had 1 year, a little bit less, I think, with President Macri, and now the rest of your term with President Alberto Fernandez. Tell me your experience and your personal relationship, if you had one, with the two of them. What was it like to work with them, and sort of, you could say, their ministers, their staff?
I had to hit the ground running because the G20 was coming up in a few months after I got there, and you had many G20s leading up to the actual G20. So I think I had 5, 6 U.S. cabinet members come before. So I was hosting the Secretary of Energy, Commerce, Treasury. They all came down here, and we had a VIP person coming in. I'd been on the job 2 or 3 months and hosting all them. And then Trump came down for the G20, and you had to host him. And so it was all this overwhelming experience of hitting the ground running, preparing for the G20, and having all these people coming in. The Macri administration was more in line with our viewpoints, as you know, and meeting his cabinet members and dealing with cabinet members. I had the opportunity to see him in person, and because there were events going on all the time, I'd run into him at different events, and we'd talk briefly, and more than just having a formal meeting where there was business, you just have chit chat. And I was able to build up a good relationship, I thought, with all the cabinet members and with the vice president and President Macri, because we would see each other at different events or go to his house, the president's house, because I had a cabinet member that wanted to meet with Macri. So I saw Macri frequently as with his cabinet members. And then you have the change of administrations. The as you know, the Peronist viewpoint, the Cristina influence, their perspective wasn't as in line with us as the Macri administration was. They saw things a little bit different. So you started to build up relationships, and their first few months, they're trying to figure out what's going on. They're trying to get organized and name their cabinet members, and their cabinet members are coming on board and trying to figure out what their job is, what their role is, what does both Fernandezes, what do they expect of me and of my agency? So they're trying to get their feet on the ground before they even start meeting with the ambassadors. And then finally, when we got to the point of let's make contact with their cabinet members and get to know them because we're going to be negotiating and discussing issues, the COVID hit. So then it was really difficult these last 10 months of communicating with them, because the only time I would communicate with them was through a video conference, Zoom, or a telephone call, and you didn't see each other at events all the time. So building a relationship with the Fernandez administration was rather challenging and difficult because you just didn't have the time or the opportunity to see them, talk to them, and just generally have friendly talks that would build up a trust and a relationship. It was always, I'm calling you because of this particular issue and we need your help, or we need you to look at our viewpoint or whatever. And it was business. And it was just not the friendly relationship trust that was built up with the Macri people, because I didn't have the opportunity to do that. So it was more difficult because the only time they'd hear from me was, what does the U.S. want now type of thing, as opposed to going to an asado and drinking a little bit of Malbec wine as I did with the Macri people. Those opportunities didn't come up with the Fernandez administration, and their Fernandez administration not being as in line with the U.S. viewpoint on things. Sometimes it was rather challenging trying to convince them of the U.S. viewpoint. With the Macri administration, there was trust, and they said, yeah, we understand, we agree, and we'll go along with it most of the time. But with Fernandez, it was a little bit more difficult explaining in detail our position and why, and trying to convince them of a particular company needing a particular statute or regulation or whatever. it became more difficult. And then running the embassy when the embassy's closed down and your staff is essentially at home made it rather difficult.
Edward, we had really mirror images in some ways of our experience because, the first year I was there was Christina and was president. And as you said, we had a very challenging relationship back then, disagreed on most things. And she didn't meet with any ambassadors that I know of at the end of her second term, including the U.S. ambassador, me. And when I told people that, they couldn't believe it because no matter what the government is around the world, they always will meet with the U.S. ambassador, even if it is over disagreements. But I told DC, I said, don't take it personal. I'm not taking it personal. We have an agenda that we're moving forward on. And then we kind of laid out an agenda of science, technology, energy, especially renewable, and educational exchanges, figuring it was hard to attack those for subject areas, and then laying the groundwork for when Macri came in. We already knew him because he was mayor of Buenos Aires, and much of his team came from the city. So we already knew them, and it went from having just very distant relationship to a very close relationship, in part, like you said, because we saw each other a lot. And President Macri, I think, was the first Argentine president to come to Palacio Bosch, the residence, in 20 years. It also helped. We had President Obama come down there for a state visit, which was also very historic. And so speaking of, you had President Trump come down. I had President Obama, as Benjamin said, very different figures. Anything that stands out in your mind, either public or private, that you can talk about that was interesting or awkward or fun on that trip?
Oh, yeah. There's several stories. Well, we'll talk about those later. But
sure.
The thing is, first off the bat, it's like, okay, well, the president's coming. I said, okay, fine, the president's coming. Yeah, and he's coming with 1,000 people.
Yeah,
and I was, what? 1,000 people? Yes, and he needs 200. I can't remember the number, but it's something like 200 of them are Secret Service or his detail, and then another 100 for the press. And so we need credentials. So I'm going, well, that's a lot. So you go to the Argentine government and go, wait a minute, this is our country. You don't need 200 people running around with guns when you have 20 of the leaders of the world of other countries around. Why should we give you that? Plus, you're asking for more than twice any other country. That's unreasonable. And we can't deliver. So then you go back to the White House and you say, look, I asked and they don't want to give it to you. Well, we want it. We're the U.S. and we want it, and we're going to get it. And I'm going to, and putting me in the middle of negotiations, and then you finally get a reasonable amount of Secret Service agents, and then Argentina says, well, we'll give you those agents, but they can't have firearms. So then you go back to the White House and you say, okay, you're going to get the amount of Secret Service agents you want, but they can't all carry firearms. Well, our agents carry firearms. And there were little things like that where you're in the middle of things. When President Trump was leaving, they said, we want you to be at the Air Force One to bid him farewell. So we want you to come to the hotel where he's staying. He did not stay at the Bosch Palace. With your group, and there'll be 2 caravans. You take off in the first caravan, and you'll be at the airport to meet President Trump. He's going to be meeting with the president of China at the hotel when you arrive, and him and others will then go in the second caravan and meet you at the airport. So we leave with my group of security in 2 cars from the Palacio Bosch to the hotel where the president was staying. And being the U.S. ambassador, security let me all the way in, and we went right into the hotel, the driveway of the hotel, when a bunch of Chinese people come out yelling at us, and then the U.S. Secret Service comes out yelling at us. And my security detail is Argentines that speak Spanish. They don't understand the Chinese. And I understood the Secret Service, but it turned out that the president of China was just about to arrive and park right where I had come and parked. And everyone was panicking because he was coming right behind me. So luckily, we moved just in time as the Chinese president arrived to go visit with President Trump. But it could have caused a big issue that the U.S. ambassador was blocking the way for the Chinese president to come meet with President Trump. But that was one adventure of many. Then once he left, we got stuck on the runway because then Great Britain, Germany, and others were leaving. So they froze any departures from the airport. So we had to wait about 2 hours at the airport before they'd let us come back and depart. So we were there and we were watching all the planes from all the other countries leave because security would not let us cross over to the airport to our automobiles. But it was an adventure. It was interesting. Opportunity that I never had to meet the president and meet cabinet members. I think being in Argentina, I met cabinet members and president, which I've never had done in the U.S. As a judge, you just aren't involved politically. And it was kind of awkward to all of a sudden be involved in the political area of things and being part of the executive branch. Never having been part of it. So.
It's to your credit, you were able to navigate that, because what I've told a lot of people, at least my experience, being ambassador, it's much more akin to being a candidate, I think, in many ways. And I came at it, campaigns and politics my whole life. And it reminds me your funny story. I had similar in some ways. President Obama came down and he stayed at Palacio Bosch. As you know, he was the fourth U.S. president over the years to stay at Palacio Bosch. And they basically say, look, he will say at the last second who goes in the car with him. It depends on his mood and the time of the day and the issues. And so there was ambassadors, at least with that president, you may or may not go with him in the Beast, in the limousine. And it was the last second, he said, come on, Noah, come with me. And we drove from Palacio Bosch to Casa Rosada. And during that drive, I'm sitting across from him and we're having a discussion, and Susan Rice, National Security Advisor, and Ben Rhodes, Deputy National Security, the four of us. And as the president's talking to me, he just waves like this, but he doesn't look out the window and he waves with his other hand. And it took me a minute to realize they can't see which hand he's waving, and because the streets were just loaded with people. So normally you'd go with your left hand, right? And he would just do it this way. And I think he learned that they can't tell, so he can continue to have a conversation and every once in a while go like this. And then when we get to Casa Rosada, they open the door, he goes out. But nobody told me which door we go out. And so I have to ask the National Security Advisor, and she said, we go out the other door. And as President Obama with President Macri started walking, as you know, the security goes with them. And so we literally had to run around the car and run back into the bubble. And we caught up to the group. But those little things that everybody thinks it's so well orchestrated, and it almost 98% of it is, but 2% is on the fly.
Yeah, I had that with a couple of the cabinet members, secretaries that came down here, and I wasn't sure, am I supposed to ride with them or not? And they said, well, we'll have to wait till the last second, but be prepared. Otherwise, you're going in car number 3, and you have to run to car number 3 because he's going to be in car number 1 taking off. But maybe he'll let you ride it with him in car number 1. So be prepared to either run back to car number 3 or get into car number 1 with them. And so there you are till the last second. They come rushing out of something, and then they'll give a wave. And a couple of times I rode in car number 1 with the secretary, and a couple of times I rode into car number 3 or number 4. But you have little, I guess I can tell this story, but little things when the Deputy Secretary of State came, and he came with Ivanka Trump. And the White House staff and State Department staff got into a quasi-argument over who was the most important representative of the U.S., the Deputy Secretary of State or Ivanka Trump, the daughter special assistant to the president. And then my staff is saying, you're the ambassador, you're the highest ranking American here, not either one of them.
You're the judge.
Either one of, yeah. So it's like arguing over whose car was going to go first in the caravan. And I don't know that Ivanka Trump or the Deputy Secretary of State even knew this was going on, but the staffers are the ones among themselves arguing over which one goes in what car. And what trivia stuff that they get into.
Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation with former U.S. ambassadors to Argentina, Noah Mamet and Edward Prado, when we'll discuss the relationship between the United States and Argentina, where it stands today, and where it's headed.
Thank you for listening to the Argentina Project podcast. This episode was produced and edited by Oscar Cruz. For more on this subject, visit our website, www.wilsoncenter.org/LAP.